The judge looked at my parents, then looked back at me. For almost 10 seconds, nobody in that courtroom said a word. My mother was sitting there with tears in her eyes, pretending she was the victim. My father sat beside her with his arms crossed, looking confident like he had already won. They had spent months telling everyone the same story. That I was irresponsible. That I couldn't handle money. That if I received my inheritance, I would waste it within a year. And somehow, they convinced people that they were only trying to protect me. But they weren't protecting me. They were protecting what they wanted to take from me. Because what they didn't know was that I had already discovered the truth. And the evidence sitting inside that folder on the judge's desk was about to destroy everything they had built. My name is Daniel Carter. And this is the story of how my own parents tried to convince a judge that I was too irresponsible to manage my inheritance. Only for that same judge to reveal the one thing they never expected. The truth. Growing up, I never thought my parents would become the people I needed protection from. They were always respected in our community. My father, Richard Carter, was the kind of man everyone trusted. He owned a successful construction company, dressed perfectly every day, and knew exactly how to impress people. My mother, Linda, was even better at appearances. She volunteered at charity events, hosted neighborhood gatherings, and always knew the right words to say. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. But inside our house, things were different. My parents had a very specific idea of what success looked like. And unfortunately, I never fit their definition. My older sister Emily was their pride and joy. She was the perfect daughter in their eyes. She graduated at the top of her class, became a lawyer, married someone wealthy, and always said the things my parents wanted to hear. I was different. I wasn't a failure. I just chose a different path. After college, I started my own small business repairing and restoring vintage furniture. My parents hated the idea. They thought it was embarrassing. They wanted me to join my father's company and follow the path they created for me. "You're wasting your potential," my father told me many times. "You're playing with hobbies instead of building a real career." But I loved what I did. I built my business from nothing. Slowly, I gained customers. Slowly, I earned respect. And for the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself. But my parents never saw it that way. To them, I was still the irresponsible son who didn't listen. Then everything changed when my grandfather passed away. My grandfather, James Carter, was the one person in my family who truly understood me. He never judged my choices. He never compared me to Emily. He always told me something I never forgot. "Daniel, people who underestimate you are usually the people who never took the time to understand you." When he died, I was devastated. But during the reading of his will, I learned something that shocked everyone. My grandfather had left me his entire investment portfolio, several properties, and a significant amount of money. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was enough to completely change my future. My parents were silent when the lawyer announced it. At first, I thought they were just surprised. I was wrong. 3 days later, my father came to my apartment. He didn't congratulate me. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He simply sat down and said, "Daniel, we need to discuss your grandfather's decision." I immediately felt something was wrong. "What do you mean?" My mother walked into the room behind him. She had that serious expression she always used when she wanted to make herself look reasonable. "Your grandfather loved you," she said softly. "But love doesn't always mean someone makes the right decision." I stared at her. "What are you saying?" My father leaned forward. "We think the inheritance should be managed by someone responsible." I laughed because I thought he was joking. Then I saw his face. He wasn't joking. "You want to manage my inheritance?" My mother shook her head. "We want to protect you from making mistakes." That was the moment I realized something. They weren't worried about me losing the money. They were worried about losing control of it. I refused. I told them the inheritance belonged to me, and I was capable of making my own decisions. That was when their attitude completely changed. The loving parents disappeared. Within weeks, they started telling relatives that I was unstable, that I had always been careless, that I had no idea how to handle money. Then I received a letter from an attorney. My parents were taking legal action. They were asking a judge to declare that I was too irresponsible to manage my own inheritance. They wanted control over everything my grandfather left me. And they had prepared a list of accusations against me. A list filled with lies. But they made one huge mistake. They underestimated me. Because while they were preparing their case, I was preparing mine. The first time I walked into that courtroom, I felt like I was walking into a battle I never asked for. I looked around the room and saw strangers deciding my future. People who had never met me were about to hear a version of my life created by the two people who were supposed to support me. My parents sat on the other side of the courtroom with their attorney. They looked calm. Almost too calm. My father whispered something to his lawyer and smiled. That smile bothered me. It was the same smile he used whenever he thought he had control over a situation. My mother noticed me looking at them. She gave me a small, sad expression. The kind of expression that made anyone watching think she was a hurt mother dealing with a difficult child. But I knew the truth. That was my mother's greatest talent. She could make people believe anything. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone stood. His name was Judge Michael Harrison. He had a reputation for being fair but extremely careful. He didn't make decisions based on emotions. He looked at facts. And that was the one thing my parents didn't expect. Facts. After everyone sat down, my parents' attorney stood up. Your Honor, this case is about protecting a young man from making a devastating mistake. I almost laughed. A devastating mistake? That was their opening argument. Not that I had committed fraud. Not that I was incapable. Not that I had harmed anyone. Their argument was simply that they didn't trust me. The attorney continued. Daniel Carter has a history of poor financial decisions, unstable career choices, and impulsive behavior. Every word felt like a punch. Because those weren't accusations from strangers. Those were the words my own parents chose to use against me. Then he started presenting examples. Small things. Things that sounded terrible when taken out of context. He mentioned that I changed careers. He mentioned that I once invested money into expanding my furniture business and it didn't immediately succeed. He mentioned that I bought an old truck for my business. According to them, these were signs of irresponsibility. But what they didn't mention was the full story. That truck helped me transport furniture. That investment eventually brought me more customers. That changing careers was the reason I built something of my own. They weren't showing my mistakes. They were hiding my progress. Then my father's attorney said something that shocked me. Your Honor, we believe Daniel's grandfather was manipulated into leaving this inheritance to him. The entire room became quiet. I looked at my parents. My mother looked down. My father avoided eye contact. That statement crossed the line. They weren't just saying I was irresponsible anymore. They were attacking my grandfather's judgment. My grandfather, the person who knew me better than anyone. I wanted to stand up and defend him. But my attorney placed a hand on my arm. Wait, she whispered. Let them continue. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. She had been recommended by a business owner I worked with. When I first met her, I wasn't sure she could handle a case like this. But after hearing my story, she said something I never forgot. Daniel, sometimes people don't try to take what belongs to you because they need it. They try because they believe they deserve it more than you do. She was right. And now she was sitting beside me, completely calm. While my parents were telling the court I was incapable. The judge reviewed the documents. Then he looked at my parents' attorney. Do you have financial records showing that Mr. Carter is unable to manage assets? The attorney paused. Not exactly, Your Honor. Do you have evidence of unpaid debts, financial abuse, or reckless spending? Another pause. No, Your Honor. The judge looked confused. So your argument is based primarily on his personal choices? The attorney cleared his throat. His choices demonstrate a pattern. A pattern. That word stayed in my mind. Because suddenly I understood their strategy. They weren't trying to prove I was dangerous. They were trying to make me look different. They wanted the judge to believe that different meant irresponsible. Then my mother was called to testify. She walked toward the witness stand slowly. She looked nervous. But I knew her. She wasn't nervous. She was performing. After taking the oath, she looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I love my son more than anything. Those words almost made me angry. Because love was exactly what she was using as a weapon. She continued. But Daniel has always struggled with responsibility. The judge asked. Can you provide specific examples? My mother nodded. When he was younger, he would make decisions without thinking about consequences. The judge looked at her. Such as? She mentioned a time when I quit a job I hated. She mentioned a time when I refused to accept money from my father. She mentioned a time when I moved out and started living independently. Things I considered moments of growth. She considered them evidence against me. Then she said the sentence that made everyone look at me. Your Honor, we are afraid that if Daniel receives full control of the inheritance, he will destroy everything his grandfather built. I felt something inside me break. Because my grandfather didn't build those things for my parents. He built them for me. And now they were trying to convince a judge that I didn't deserve the trust of the man who believed in me. But my attorney was waiting. She knew something they didn't. Because before the hearing started, she had discovered something hidden in my grandfather's estate documents. Something my parents never knew existed. A letter. A letter written by my grandfather just days before he passed away. And when the judge finally read that letter, the entire courtroom changed. The courtroom was silent as my attorney stood up. Your Honor, before the court makes any decision, we would like to submit additional evidence. My parents' attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, this appears to be an attempt to introduce irrelevant emotional material. Judge Harrison looked at him calmly. That depends on what the evidence contains. My attorney opened a folder. Your Honor, this is a personal letter written by James Carter, the deceased grandfather of Daniel Carter, approximately 1 week before his passing. The moment she said my grandfather's name, my father's expression changed. Just slightly. But I noticed. Because my father always had a way of hiding his emotions. Except when something surprised him. The judge accepted the letter. He opened the envelope carefully. For a few moments, he simply read. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And then I saw something I never expected. The judge looked up. Not angry. Not shocked. Just disappointed. He looked at my parents. Did either of you know about this letter? My mother immediately shook her head. No, Your Honor. The judge looked back at the document. Then I suggest everyone listens carefully. My heart started beating faster. Because even though I knew my grandfather trusted me, I had no idea what he wrote. The judge began reading. To whoever is reading this letter, especially my family. His voice filled the courtroom. I know there will be questions about my decision. I know some people will believe Daniel is not the obvious choice. I looked down. Even hearing those words hurt. Because my grandfather knew exactly what would happen. He knew my family would challenge his decision. The judge continued. But what those people do not understand is that Daniel has something more valuable than money. He has character. My mother looked uncomfortable. My father stared straight ahead. The judge continued. I watched my grandson struggle. I watched him fail. I watched him start again. Those moments did not make him irresponsible. They proved he had courage. I felt my eyes getting heavy. Because my grandfather was the only person who had ever described my failures that way. Not as weaknesses. As proof that I kept going. The judge continued reading. I have seen people who look successful from the outside but cannot be trusted when nobody is watching. At that moment, my father shifted in his seat. My attorney noticed. I noticed. The judge continued. Money does not create someone's character. It reveals the character that already exists. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I specifically instructed my attorney that if anyone attempted to challenge Daniel's inheritance by claiming he was irresponsible, the court should review the financial actions of those making the accusation. The courtroom became completely still. I looked at my parents. For the first time that day, they didn't look confident. They looked worried. My attorney stood up. Your Honor, based on this instruction, we would like to present financial records regarding Mr. and Mrs. Carter. My father's attorney immediately stood. Objection. The judge looked at him. On what grounds? These documents are unrelated. The judge held up the letter. According to the deceased's own instructions, they may be very relevant. The objection was denied. My attorney walked toward the judge and handed over the documents. I watched my parents carefully. My mother was whispering something to my father. He looked angry. Not concerned. Angry. And that told me everything. Because innocent people usually want the truth to come out. But guilty people worry about what the truth will reveal. The judge reviewed the documents. The first few pages were normal. Then he stopped. He looked at another page. Then another. His expression slowly changed. Mr. Carter. My father stood. Yes, Your Honor? Can you explain these withdrawals from your father's estate account? My father's face went pale. What withdrawals? The judge looked down. Several transfers made before James Carter's death. My stomach dropped. Because I had no idea what he was talking about. My father looked at his attorney. For the first time, he looked nervous. Those were family matters, my father said. The judge raised his eyebrows. Family matters involving money belonging to your father? Nobody answered. My attorney then revealed the information she had discovered. Your Honor, these transfers were made without Daniel's knowledge. They occurred during the months when Mr. Carter's health was declining. I looked at my parents. Suddenly, everything started making sense. The urgency. The pressure. The sudden interest in controlling my inheritance. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to protect themselves. But there was more. My attorney turned another page. These records also show that Mr. and Mrs. Carter have significant financial difficulties. My mother immediately interrupted. That doesn't mean anything. The judge looked at her. Mrs. Carter, please wait until you are asked to respond. She became silent. My attorney continued. They were not concerned about Daniel wasting the inheritance. She paused. They were concerned because they needed access to it. Those words hit the courtroom like a storm. My parents' entire story was falling apart. But then my father did something nobody expected. He stood up and admitted something. Something that changed the entire case. He said, "Fine. We needed help. But that doesn't mean Daniel can handle millions of dollars." And that was the moment the judge asked the question that would expose the biggest lie of all. Mr. Carter, if you truly believed your son was irresponsible, why did you try to control his inheritance before ever seeing whether he could manage it? My father's face changed when the judge asked that question. For the first time in my life, I saw him without the confidence. Without the perfect image. Without the control he always carried. Because the judge had just exposed the biggest weakness in his argument. If they were truly worried about me, why had they never tried to help me before? Why had they never suggested financial advice? Why had they never offered guidance? Why was the first solution taking control of everything that belonged to me? My father sat back down. His attorney leaned over and whispered something to him. But the damage was already done. Everyone in that courtroom understood the same thing. This case was never really about my responsibility. It was about their access. The judge looked at the documents again. Mr. Carter, these financial transfers are concerning. My father cleared his throat. Your Honor, my father knew about those transactions. My attorney immediately responded. Then why were they hidden from the estate records? Silence. My father looked frustrated. Because they were private family matters. The judge shook his head. Private matters involving hundreds of thousands of dollars are still financial matters. My mother looked at my father. And that was when I noticed something. They weren't acting like a team anymore. They were scared. For years, they had presented themselves as the perfect couple. The perfect parents. The people who always knew what was best. But when their own actions were questioned, that image started falling apart. My attorney walked back toward the judge. Your Honor, we would also like to submit communication records. My heart skipped. I had no idea what she had. She opened another folder. These are messages between Mr. and Mrs. Carter discussing Daniel's inheritance before they ever filed this petition. My parents' attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, this is an invasion of privacy. The judge looked at him. Are these messages authentic? He hesitated. We have not verified them. My attorney responded. We have. The judge allowed the evidence. My attorney handed the documents forward. A few moments later, the judge began reading. The courtroom was silent. Then his expression changed. He looked at my parents. Mrs. Carter, did you write this message? My mother looked nervous. I don't remember. The judge read the message aloud. We need to convince Daniel before the court gets involved. Once he has full control, we lose our chance. I felt a cold feeling in my chest. Because those words came from my mother. The same woman who told everyone she was only trying to protect me. The judge continued reading. Another message. This one was from my father. If we can't control the inheritance, we need to make sure Daniel doesn't have the ability to use it. The courtroom became completely quiet. I looked at my parents. My mother was crying now. But for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. Because I knew those tears weren't because she hurt me. They were because she was losing. My father finally spoke. Those messages don't mean what you think they mean. The judge looked at him. Then explain what they mean. My father opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because there was no explanation. Only the truth. My attorney continued. Your Honor, we believe this petition was filed in bad faith. The judge nodded slowly. I agree there are serious questions regarding the motivation behind this case. But then something happened that surprised everyone. My mother turned toward me. Daniel, please. Her voice sounded different. Not angry. Not confident. Desperate. We are still your parents. That sentence would have worked on me years ago. Maybe even months ago. But after everything I had discovered, it didn't. Because being my parent gave them a responsibility. Not ownership. They had confused love with control. My attorney whispered. Don't respond. So I stayed quiet. The judge reviewed the final documents. Then he asked my attorney, is there anything else the court should know? My attorney looked at me. I nodded. There was one more thing. Something I had kept hidden. Something I never wanted to use against my parents. But they had forced my hand. My attorney submitted one final piece of evidence. A recorded conversation. The courtroom froze. Because in that recording, My parents said something they never thought anyone would hear. And those few minutes would completely change the judge's final decision. The courtroom felt different the moment the recording was mentioned. Even my parents' attorney looked surprised. He turned toward them. "What recording?" My father didn't answer. My mother looked at him. And in that moment, I knew they both remembered. They knew exactly what was coming. My attorney connected a small device and handed it to the court clerk. "Your Honor, this recording was obtained from a conversation that took place between Mr. and Mrs. Carter in their own home. It directly relates to their intentions regarding this inheritance dispute." The judge looked at my parents. "Is there any objection?" Their attorney stood. "Your Honor, we object to the use of this recording." The judge asked, "On what basis?" The attorney paused. "Because it may be taken out of context." The judge nodded. "That is something the court can determine after hearing it." The room became silent. Then the recording began. At first, there was only background noise. Then I heard my father's voice. "We can't let him get full control." My stomach tightened. Even though I had heard it before, hearing it inside that courtroom felt different. Because now everyone could hear the truth. My mother's voice followed. "Daniel thinks this is about trust. He doesn't understand what is at stake." My father responded, "If he gets those assets, we lose everything." A few seconds of silence passed. Then my mother said something I would never forget. "Maybe we should have made him believe he wasn't capable from the beginning." The courtroom went completely still. I looked down. Because that sentence hurt more than any accusation they had made against me. They weren't just trying to take my inheritance. They had spent years making me doubt myself. They had criticized my choices. They had compared me to my sister. They had convinced me that I was always one mistake away from failure. And now I understood why. It wasn't because they wanted me to become better. It was because someone who doubts himself is easier to control. The recording continued. My father said, "People will believe us. Everyone knows Daniel is not the responsible one." My mother replied, "Exactly. We just need the judge to see what everyone else already sees." Then the recording ended. Nobody spoke. Not my parents. Not their attorney. Not even the judge. Finally, Judge Harrison placed the device on the table. He looked at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, I want to give you an opportunity to explain." My father took a deep breath. "Your Honor, we were under pressure." The judge didn't respond. My father continued. "We made mistakes. But we were only trying to protect our family." My attorney stood. "Protect the family or protect yourselves?" My father looked angry. But he didn't answer. The judge looked through the documents one more time. Then he said something that I will never forget. "The court has heard many cases involving family disagreements over money." He paused. "But this case is different." Everyone listened. Because the evidence shows that this was not a disagreement about Daniel's ability. It was an attempt to remove his control over an inheritance that was legally and intentionally given to him. My mother's face became pale. The judge continued. "Mr. James Carter made his decision clearly. He understood his grandson. He trusted his grandson. And this court will respect that decision." I felt a wave of emotion hit me. For months, I had felt like I was fighting against my entire family. But sitting there, hearing those words, I felt like my grandfather was finally being heard. Then the judge addressed the main issue. The petition to restrict Daniel Carter's control over his inheritance is denied. A quiet reaction moved through the courtroom. My parents had lost. But the judge wasn't finished. He looked at them seriously. However, there are additional concerns regarding the financial transfers from the estate. My father looked nervous again. "The court will refer these matters for further review." My mother grabbed my father's hand. For the first time, they looked afraid of the consequences. The hearing was over. People started leaving. My attorney packed her files. I sat there for a moment, unable to move. I thought winning would feel better. I thought I would feel satisfaction. But instead, I felt something else. Sadness. Because the people I defeated were the same people who were supposed to stand beside me. Outside the courtroom, my mother approached me. "Daniel." I stopped walking. She looked different. Not like the confident woman who walked into the courtroom. She looked tired. Broken. "We never wanted it to go this far." I looked at her. "Then why did you take it this far?" She didn't answer. Because there was no answer. My father stood behind her. For once, he had nothing to say. Then my mother whispered, "Are you really going to cut us out of your life?" I looked at both of them. And I realized something. Forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. I could forgive them someday. But I didn't have to pretend nothing happened. Because the hardest lesson I learned wasn't about money. It was about knowing who truly believes in you. And who only believes in what they can get from you. But the story wasn't completely over. Because after the court decision, I discovered one final secret about my grandfather's inheritance. A secret that changed the way I looked at everything. And it proved that my grandfather was always one step ahead. I thought the courtroom battle was the end. I thought once the judge made his decision, everything would finally be finished. But I was wrong. Because my grandfather had left behind one final message. A message that nobody knew existed. Not my parents. Not my sister. Not even me. 3 days after the hearing, my attorney Sarah called me. "Daniel, there is something you need to see." The tone of her voice immediately made me nervous. "What happened?" "Nothing bad," she said. "But there is another document from your grandfather's estate." I sat down. "Another document?" "Yes. And based on the instructions, it could only be opened after the inheritance dispute was resolved." For a moment, I didn't say anything. My grandfather had planned for this. He knew there was a possibility someone would challenge his decision. He knew there was a chance my family would try to take control. And somehow, he had prepared for it. The next morning, I went to the attorney's office. Sarah placed a sealed envelope on the table. My name was written on the front. But underneath my name was a sentence that made my hands shake. "To Daniel. Open only when you have learned who truly stands beside you." I stared at those words. Because suddenly I realized something. My grandfather wasn't just protecting my inheritance. He was protecting me. Sarah looked at me. "Are you ready?" I nodded. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was familiar. The same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, holiday notes, and small messages he left for me throughout my life. I took a deep breath and began reading. "Daniel, if you are reading this, then something happened that forced you to prove yourself to people who should have trusted you." I stopped for a moment. Because those words were exactly what happened. The letter continued. "I want you to understand something important. The inheritance was never a test of whether you could manage money. It was a test of whether you understood your own value." I felt my eyes become heavy. My grandfather always knew the things I struggled with. He knew I spent years trying to prove myself to people who had already decided who I was. The letter continued. "Your parents may have spent years telling you that you are not responsible enough. But responsibility is not measured by perfection. It is measured by how someone responds when things become difficult." I looked at Sarah. She smiled slightly. "He knew you better than anyone." I continued reading. "Daniel, I did not choose you because you were the most successful. I chose you because you were the most honest." Then came the part one never expected. My grandfather revealed that he had created a separate trust. A trust designed not only to protect the inheritance, but to continue his life's work. He wanted me to use a portion of the money to help small business owners who were struggling to get started. People like the person I used to be. Someone with a dream but without enough support. I couldn't believe it. My grandfather wasn't giving me money just to make my life easier. He was giving me a responsibility. A purpose. At the bottom of the letter was one final sentence. Never allow people who underestimated you to convince you that you are less than you are. I read that sentence several times. Because for years, I had carried my parents' opinion of me. Every criticism. Every comparison. Every moment when they made me feel like I wasn't enough. But my grandfather saw something different. He saw potential. A few weeks later, I officially took control of the inheritance. But I made decisions that surprised everyone. I didn't buy an expensive house. I didn't buy luxury cars. I didn't try to prove anything to the people who doubted me. Instead, I invested in my business. I expanded my restoration company. I hired employees. I created opportunities. And then I started the foundation my grandfather dreamed about. A small program helping young entrepreneurs get their first chance. The same chance I wished someone had given me. People started noticing. The same community members who once believed my parents' version of the story began seeing the truth. They saw that I wasn't irresponsible. I was simply different. But one person still struggled with the outcome. My father. Because losing control of the inheritance wasn't the only thing he lost. He lost the image he spent years building. People began asking questions about the financial transfers from my grandfather's estate. The investigation continued. And slowly, more details came out. Details that explained why my parents were so desperate to control everything. They had made financial decisions they couldn't undo. They had borrowed money. They had hidden problems. And when they saw my inheritance as a solution, they convinced themselves they were entitled to it. But the truth was simple. Someone else's success is not your rescue plan. And someone else's trust is not something you can steal. Months later, I received a message from my mother. It was only one sentence. I hope someday you can understand why we did what we did. I stared at that message for a long time. Because the old me would have immediately replied. I would have tried to explain. I would have tried to fix everything. But I wasn't that person anymore. I finally understood something my grandfather had tried to teach me. Sometimes the people who hurt you are the same people who taught you the most important lessons. And sometimes justice isn't about watching someone lose. Sometimes justice is about finally becoming the person they said you could never become. A year passed after the courtroom battle. A year since the day my parents tried to convince a judge that I was too irresponsible to control my own future. Looking back, it was strange. Because the thing they used against me, the thing they claimed proved I couldn't be trusted, was the same thing that helped me rebuild my life. My independence. My willingness to take risks. My ability to start over when things didn't go perfectly. For years, my parents saw those qualities as weaknesses. But my grandfather saw them as strengths. And that difference changed everything. My restoration business grew faster than I ever imagined. The small company I started with old furniture and a simple dream became something much bigger. I hired people who needed opportunities. I trained young workers who reminded me of myself. People who had talent but just needed someone to believe in them. Every time I helped someone get their first chance, I thought about my grandfather. Because that was the person he always was. Someone who didn't just give people money. He gave people belief. A few months after everything happened, I visited his old house. It had been sold as part of the estate, but I wanted to walk through it one last time. I stood in the backyard where we used to sit together. I remembered all the conversations we had. The advice. The stories. The moments when he made me feel like I mattered. And I finally understood something. My grandfather knew exactly what kind of battle I was going to face. He knew there would be people who questioned me. He knew there would be people who tried to make me feel unworthy. But he also knew something else. He knew I didn't need someone to fight my battles forever. I just needed someone to remind me that I was capable of fighting them myself. A few weeks later, I saw my parents again. Not in court. Not during an argument. Just by coincidence. I was leaving a business meeting when I saw them across the street. My mother looked older. My father looked quieter. The confidence they once carried was gone. For a moment, none of us moved. Then my mother walked toward me. "Daniel." I nodded. "Hi, Mom." There was a long silence. Finally, she said, "I know things can't go back to how they were." I didn't say anything. Because she was right. Some things cannot be undone. Some words cannot be taken back. Some trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild. She looked down. I was wrong. Those 3 words were difficult to hear. Not because I didn't want an apology, but because I had waited so long for them. And when they finally came, I realized I no longer needed them to heal. I had already healed. My father stepped forward. "I should have believed in you." I looked at him. "Yes. You should have." He looked away. Because sometimes the hardest truth is the one people already know. We talked for a few minutes. Not like the family we used to be, but like people who finally understood what happened. I didn't promise everything would be okay. I didn't pretend the past didn't happen. But I chose not to carry anger forever. Because holding on to anger would mean they still controlled part of my life. And I had spent too many years trying to escape their control. That day, I walked away feeling lighter. Not because my parents apologized. Not because I won the court case. But because I finally stopped needing their approval. And that was the real inheritance my grandfather gave me. Not the money. Not the properties. Not the investments. The confidence to trust myself. If there is one lesson I learned from everything that happened, it is this. Never let someone else's opinion of you become your identity. Sometimes the people closest to you can misunderstand you the most. They may only see your mistakes, your failures, your struggles. But they don't always see your growth. They don't always see the battles you fought silently. And they definitely don't get to decide your worth. Money can be inherited. Properties can be transferred. But confidence, character, and resilience, those are built. And once you build them, nobody can take them away. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever had someone close to you underestimate you? Someone who made you feel like you weren't capable of achieving something? Share your story in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful comebacks start when someone finally decides to believe in themselves. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Karma Stories Hub for more emotional stories about betrayal, justice, and life-changing moments. Thank you for watching. And remember, the people who doubt you today may be the same people who watch you succeed tomorrow.